And now we have reached our final moment of reflection, at least for today. And we look forward to hearing the final remarks that will be offered by Professor Diane Ring, Interim Dean of Faculty and Professor of Law at Boston College Law. Dear Diane, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Costa. So I thought what I would do, I don't want to sort of try to summarize or review everything that we've covered today, in part because it's simply not possible. But I thought I would do what I would try to do is what I myself need to do as I sit through a series of sessions, as I have done today, that just have so many valuable sort of thoughts, ideas, pieces of information. How do I pull it together in my head and hold on to it and sort of make use of it? And so I thought I might sort of put the question first to you, each of you who have been here today. What brought you to a session, a conference on corruption and taxation, right? Financial crimes and taxation. What brought you? What kinds of problems were you thinking about? So I start there for myself. And then I sort of think about, well, I'm trying to think about what problems are most important from my perspective. And if I were, thinking about a particular country, I might approach it that way and sort of even give an empirical look at the state of affairs in the country to whom I would direct my attention and sort of say, what are those specific problems I am right now particularly interested in trying to think about how to tackle, whether I'm an academic, a researcher, I'm in the media, I'm in the government, right, a nonprofit. What is it I'm trying to think about? And am I thinking most immediately about sort of what we think of as traditional corruption and how it relates to tax? That might be bribes and related crimes. Am I thinking about the toleration of essentially the facilitation of tax avoidance, both by legislatures that allow and put in place certain kinds of rules, administrators and enforcers who sort of enforce in a certain way, but not perhaps all the way, and then to all the various enablers. So is that what I'm really trying to get at? Someone mentioned in a panel today the idea of unnormalizing tax crime and corruption as sort of a goal. I think that's another sort of interesting angle on what might be driving you here today. Sarah mentioned, right, and I raised this in our third panel, an idea of governments not wanting to touch something, and sort of why is that? What are the pressure points that are part of our maybe expanded understanding of corruption that lead governments to just not want to touch it or not want to touch it too deeply? And sort of once I have in mind some of the specific problems I might be most thinking about, we've had, I think, a pretty rich discussion, particularly in the last panel, but throughout, about recognizing the full range of harms. And I thought that was really worth highlighting, because to the extent you're really trying to make a successful move in stopping some aspect of kind of the intersection of corruption and tax crime, you need to get others on board. And I'm going to end there in just a moment, but you need to get others on board. And how do you do that? You're able to articulate a full range of harms. Some may be more salient or more relevant in a particular context than others, but they seem across the board to be significant. Obviously, revenue loss, but that's only a starting point. We talked about equitable contributions to the fisc, sort of equal treatment outside of sort of the tax system for those businesses, for example, is another way of equity. Trust in government, right? Support, what I would say, for democratic engagement for the system, right? That's a harm to the extent we have, broadly speaking, corruption and sort of tax crimes, tax abuse going hand in hand. We've talked about the ability or the lack of our ability to meet sustainability, development goals, human rights goals, as we may allow sort of these, tax abuse to flourish. And then finally, also that idea of how the tax abuse can facilitate and support other kinds of corruption and financial crimes. So a really rich, unfortunately rich, array of harms that can come from this, but also once we really articulate them, can help us perhaps be more influential, more successful in sort of trying to persuade others where and why there are problems and that they're worthy of a solution. A number of important sort of themes and ideas in this, I think, came out for me. One was, thinking about the attitude of the population, right? Both towards the tax system, towards the government, and really towards the importance of the tax system, right? That it even matters, right? Mechanisms that make it easier or difficult to engage in bad behavior. That came up in a number of panels, but thinking about that as a sort of way to look at your own tax system. The enforcement side, obviously critical. And then the ways that different kinds of corruption may flourish to varying degrees in different jurisdictions. So we have our broad definition that we've been looking at and thinking about in terms of what corruption looks like here. But in each jurisdiction, we may find that there are particular threads of that are either our most important focus or a particularly current problem, right? And then we saw a range of recommendations coming through. And again, I just kind of highlight them more to give the sense of how much is out there, right? So from technical tools, electronic taxation, taking humans out of part of it, transparency on spending, that's bulking up the support for the government, for the tax system. It is worthy of our support because it's doing something good as an important part of our system and really our kind of social contract. Investigative powers, right? Sort of what does the structure of enforcement and regulation look like? The role of the private sector. And we've seen different mechanisms to put greater responsibility on them, but then asking a question, how effective is that responsibility in curbing the sort of undesired behavior on the part of enablers? Data, right? I thought that came up a number of times, the importance of good data, and also the comparability of data across jurisdictions to the extent we're speaking across. If we're looking inside our own country, maybe we don't have to work quite as much if we have a consistent use inside the country, but if we want to look more broadly. And then I think the last thing I want to do, because we've just hit about the final mark, is just to sort of say all of this, right, requires, even if we have big picture ideas about goals and problems in the system, we have some range of kinds of solutions. At the end of the day, every single one of the panelists has talked in some way or another about the need to have broader interest or commitment by a wide range of actors in making change, whether that's substantive law change, procedural change, the behavior of the government, the behavior of tax advisors, whatever it is, it requires a commitment from many. And that means that along the way, we're going to have to change the perspective of a number of direct participants. That could be the operational level of the government who's administering the tax system. It can be the policy level. Think about legislative or legislators and their view of how important the tax system is, why it matters, what it looks like, why it matters if we see these problems. But also the need to gather broader public support. And that can be again, at many sort of touch points, support just for the government, for the tax system, for appreciating the value of the tax system, for having knowledge about what the problems are, how pervasive they are, and what the solutions might look like. And then finally, I think my last remark would be more of a really personal observation to sort of raise the idea that we frequently in tax talk about this gray space and a little bit the idea, well, between tax fraud and evasion on the one hand and good tax planning, there's a gray space. Sometimes we call it tax avoidance. That gray space may or may not be illegal. Yes, that's all true. And it is a bit complicated due to the nature of tax law, right? But I also think the existence and the size and the robustness of that space is a product of sort of popular and institutional, legislative, judicial, and private sector support for that space, either support affirmatively or through sort of passive non-engagement with the existence of that space. And I think that's very much part of this broader question of how we think about tax corruption far beyond bribery, but into sort of all the sort of forces, whether, as Costa mentioned, revolving door or other, sort of ways in which all the participants are influenced, but not necessarily for the public good, but more on a private level. So I'm going to close it there today. To join us tomorrow, which I encourage you all to do, you will need to sign up for the second day separately. That link is right now in the chat box. So you can just go right to that, click on it, sign up, and then you will be with us tomorrow. But Costa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much for capturing some of the most interesting points that our panelists have raised today. To all our speakers and members of the audience, thank you again for joining and staying with us for this quite long but surely fascinating afternoon of discussion. We look forward to meeting you all tomorrow for the second day of the VIRTEU Final International Conference. Bye-bye.